So I attached the buoys to the front of Shooter's saddle, and he didn't handle it so well. Stick around and see what happens next. Welcome back to Becky, Amio Horse Training, and in this session I decided to attach the buoys to the pommel on Shooter's saddle. Now the pivot missed the very first part of the video where I was physically attaching it, but you guys didn't miss much of anything. On this side, he seems to be responding to it really well. I always start with them with the pommel on the inside of the circle, that way it's not banging them nearly as hard. And what I'm looking for is the quality of his movements, okay? So that's going to be a good indicator to me how well he's accepting this, is by how well he balances going around this round pen, picking up his feet, stepping over the little ground poles and the jumps that I have raised, while accepting this buoy that's banging on the inside of that leg there. So I'm going to go ahead and change directions here because he seems to be doing all right so far. Initially, I keep him to the inside circle off of those ground poles to get him confident in experiencing and feeling that. And the buoy always bangs more on the outside of that leg. And what I'm looking for, again, is quality of movement. I take him over the ground poles this time, and we see a change in his movement there, but he picks up the correct lead. They always speed up, slow down, or buck when they lose their balance, okay? So towards the end of that circle there, going over the ground poles, he lost his balance and he had to speed up, which he took a lope, but fortunately for us, he took the correct lead. Now, that time again, but he broke himself down back to the trot, so really good there. He's being very reasonable. He's accepting it pretty well for what we're doing here. That thing tends to bang a lot on that front outside leg, and it's really annoying to them. And so what I'm looking for is for him to just, you know, work with quality, accept it that it's banging on him, it's not hurting him anywhere, and I'm looking for him to be reasonable here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the sides on the buoy because they always have one side that they're better about than the other, and we want to make sure we've worked through all the lie detector tests on these horses to make sure that, you know, they're accepting of everything that we're doing to them and they're balanced before we step our foot in that stirrup and put the first ride on them. And that's how we're going to keep them safe and keep ourselves safe and prevent injury and accidents from happening. We see there that he dropped his head a little bit as he went around. Again, I'm keeping him to the inside of this circle, and I always, when we're starting out on a new leg here, I keep the buoy on the inside rather than the outside. And here he skips that last couple of jumps there, those last two ground poles, and you know that's an indication that he's out of balance on that side. Okay, this side is a problem for him, so he's a little bit weaker on it. Let's slow-mo it down and watch. He's cross-firing here. He's disunited. He's on the wrong lead all the way around, and then he's not really paying attention to where this lick tub is in the round pen, and he has to jump out of the way of that as well. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, hey, get that lick tub out of there, doesn't need to be in there, but they have to pay attention to all the stuff that's in this round pen. When we go out on the trail, they need to pay attention to a boulder or pay attention to a down tree branch. They need to know that stuff is there, and they need to pay attention and get out of its way. So I like that he was able to let me talk him off the edge there when he got worked up. You know, he got a little upset there. He came back down to a stop and let me pet and rub on him. That's what we're looking for with Shooter, because he can get very, very reactive, as you guys know who've been following his videos up until this point. We want this colt to stop, slow down, get quiet, look for us for leadership rather than doing a runoff or, you know, going out of control. Here, he kept a really nice cadence trotting around, but he's still picking up that right lead. The camera lost me there shortly for a second, and I was at the very end of that particular part of the session. So I went back to adding the second buoy on. And now, one of these buoys, the rope, the attachment on is a little bit longer than the other, and we're going to find here that bothers him quite a bit because it hits him in a different place on his body. So where one is hitting him more in the forearm, the other one's hitting him more in the knee, and he's going to the left. It's his better side. He's paying attention better. He's staying pretty soft. he's wanting to slow down and stop, and he's keeping an even cadence trotting over these ground poles. Again, this is what I'm looking for, is him to remain balanced, hold himself together, being able to kind of talk him off the edge if he does get worked up. That's what I'm looking for in this horse. Every horse is going to be a little bit different in what I'm looking for. Some of them that aren't reactive, that are not responsive, I'm looking to put a little bit of feel into that kind of horse and making them go. You see here, he completely lost his balance, lost his confidence, came to a complete stop, and then had to do this lopey hoppy thing over the ground poles. Those are all indicators that this horse isn't ready yet. And we have to pay attention to those indicators. Otherwise, these horses aren't ready for a first ride. And that's how we know, whether they're safe to move on with or not. I would go as far as to say that we're not seeing this in those, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day colt starting challenges. They're not getting this kind of stuff done with the horse, and they're getting on him. And that's why we're seeing those kind of wrecks in those circumstances, because we're not working through this horse's balance and working on his confidence to this degree. Again, being able to talk him off the edge there when he gets upset and worried, keeping his feet moving. Again, we're getting a lot of hopping there. We've lost some of the confidence from this side. He gets a little bit tight on that lunge line too, because I'm not letting him go all the way to the rail. And for one reason for doing that is because the pivot, won't keep us in frame if I let him go all the way to the rail. But when they don't go all the way to the rail, I want them to stay soft on that line. I don't want them to get really tight and be dragging me around the round pen, okay? So I want them to stay soft, look at me for their balance rather than balancing off the rail. Have you guys ever heard of people that have had a wreck in the round pen or the arena because the horse ran them into the rail? That's another form of balance. We'll know how balanced they are by how well they hold that circle off of the rail and make a smaller circle to the inside of this round pen. So he's struggling quite a bit more with the buoy on the outside when he goes to the right. He starts to think about going over the ground poles, but he's not confident enough to carry himself over the ground poles and deal with all of this banging on himself. He manages to make it across that time, but again, we go back to crossfiring again. Watch. He still is on his right lead. He's crossfiring behind. That buoy is banging him on the shoulder. He's paying attention to that buoy, and he gets disunited again. I go ahead and keep him moving, bring him off the ground poles again, get him confident again going in a circle. He tries to take a lope, and I'm not asking for it. Most of the time I'm doing this work at a trot, and then I start to add in the lope. You see back there where he wanted to stop there pretty hard. Like I told you guys, when horses lose their balance, they either slow down, speed up, or they buck. And he's kind of going back and forth between that speeding up and slowing down. Thankfully, he's not bucking. Otherwise, we'd have to have something else to address. Again, not confident enough to go around all the ground poles. But thankfully right here, he was willing to stop and face up to me. And that's all I'm looking for on this horse, is to him to allow me to talk him off the edge. We all know accidents are going to happen, but it's what they do after the accident happens or after they spook. It's what they do in response. I would much prefer a horse that stopped rather than sped up and ran off with me. I'm going to go ahead and change out the buoys and put the shorter one to the outside and just see how much of a difference that makes for him. Sometimes altering little tiny things about your groundwork or about your ride when you're in the tack can change and make an entire difference about how that horse responds and their perspective of the world. And it could be the make or break whether you have a good session or not and that horse comes around. We really see here that he's paying attention to that buoy a lot, counter-arcing the body. He's got the ear cocked, the head is cocked. You can tell he's really tight through his rib cage. That's the kind of stuff we have to pay attention to during our groundwork, no matter what we're doing. Whether we have a dummy up on his back, using the flank rope, using a buoy, the stirrup on the saddle could be bothering him like this. Like, this horse isn't ready for a rider yet. Could you imagine being the rider up there right now and he was responding like that? He doesn't feel good. He's not accepting this yet. And I think we need to pay more attention to all of that when we're doing our groundwork on these horses. We'd certainly have a whole lot less accidents. And so we continue to work through this, and he's getting more confident all the time. He's keeping the cadence at a trot. He might be reaching out and speeding up a little bit more, but he's keeping that trot. And I'm going to go ahead and stop with that. I think that's a great place to end there. I pet and rub on him, and I pull these buoys off of him. And what's so important with Shooter that we really have to pay attention to, because he tells us all the signs, right? He's very vocal about what he feels good about and what he doesn't, right? If you've been following this whole time. And this is a big deal for me to be able to rub on his face. He's never been one to allow me to rub on his face very much. And we see him lick and chew and bob his head down lower than his withers. Let's slow-mo it down and take a look at what's happening here. We get a good lick and chew. That head goes below the withers, and he does his bob, and he's getting a good hit of dopamine. He feels really good about what we just did, and that's a great place to end on with this particular horse. So I hope you guys appreciate everything that I showed you today. I hope you can carry that through on some of your own horses. And I'm going to call it a day. Stick around. We're going to be doing his first ride pretty soon. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.